The night was quiet around the human's small outpost. His name was Daniel, a man who lived alone on the edge of the trade routes. Kay was not rich, not important, only a repairman who fixed broken machines for travelers passing through. Most nights were the same silence, the cold wind, and the hum of his tools. But that night, something different happened. A large crate was dropped at his door by a cargo drone. Daniel frowned when he saw it. The delivery had no order number that matched his name, the label was smudged, the address was unclear, and the barcode refused to scan. He thought maybe it was spare parts he had requested, but the size was too big, too heavy. He dragged it inside anyway, telling himself he would check it tomorrow. But as he moved the crate, he heard something strange, a soft sound, like movement. From inside, he froze, heart racing, and leaned closer. There it was, again shifting, scratching, and then a faint, weak breath. This was no normal delivery. Daniel grabbed his crowbar and forced the crate open. The lid cracked apart with a hiss of stale air. At first he saw only shadows inside. But then he saw her, a woman, curled up in the corner, her skin faintly glowing in the dim light. She was alien, delicate features, silver strands of hair, and strange markings that shimmered on her arms. Her eyes fluttered open, wide and filled. With fear, she gasped and tried to speak, but the words came broken. Not. Send. Back. She whispered, her voice shaking. Daniel stepped back in shock. This was no mistake of parts, no accident. This was a person. For a moment he could not think. Why would a living being be sealed in a crate like cargo? Who would send her? And why did she end up here at his forgotten outpost? He knew the answer would be dangerous, but the fear in her eyes made him hesitate. If he called the port authority, they would come with questions, and maybe with chains. The woman tried to rise, but her legs were weak. She stumbled, and Daniel caught her before she could fall. Her skin was warm, trembling, her breath shallow. She looked at him as if he was her only chance. Daniel felt something stir in his chest, a strange mix of anger and protectiveness. He gave her water, then bread from his table. She ate carefully, almost like she had not eaten in days. Between bites, she tried again to speak, her voice soft. No. Back. Master. Cruel. She managed. Daniel's jaw tightened. He understood enough. She was meant to be delivered as property, not a guest. The repairman's home was small. A single room with tools, a bed, and shelves of old parts. It was no palace, but that night it became a shelter. The woman sat near the small heater, her silver hair glowing under the dim light. She wrapped herself in a blanket he gave, eyes never leaving him. It was as if she was waiting for him to decide her fate. Daniel could not sleep. He paced the floor, thinking of the risk. Someone powerful had sent her, someone cruel enough to ship a living woman like an object. If they realized she had gone to the wrong human, they would come looking, and if they found her here, he would be accused of theft or worse. Yet when he looked at her, curled up on his bed and whispering in her sleep, he knew he could not send her back, not to whoever had locked her in that crate, not to a life of chains and ownership. For the first time in years, his quiet outpost felt alive. And he felt a choice burning inside him. The wrong delivery had come to his door. But maybe it was not wrong after all. Maybe fate had sent her to him. As the night stretched on, Daniel stood watch, listening to every sound outside, and he whispered to himself, "You're safe here. No one will take you back." Outside, the desert wind howled across the barren land. But inside that small outpost, something new had begun. Something dangerous, something powerful. A mistake that would change both their lives forever. Asterisk. The heater hummed softly in the corner, filling the outpost with a faint warmth. Daniel sat at the small table, his eyes fixed on the alien woman wrapped in his blanket. Her breathing was steady now, her chest rising and falling gently, but her face still carried shadows of fear. She had fallen asleep, but even in sleep, her fingers twitched like someone used two chains or sudden blows. Daniel rubbed his tired eyes, his mind a storm of questions. Why had she been delivered like a crate of tools who had ordered her? And what did they plan to do with her? And most of all, why did fate place her at his door? A simple man with no power, no protection. Every answer led only to more unease. He looked again at her glowing markings, the faint lines across her arms and neck. They were not tattoos, not scars, something alive. Pulsing gently like veins of light. He had seen many alien traders, but never markings like these. When the heater light flickered, the patterns shifted, almost like they responded to energy. Daniel shivered, realizing she might not only be rare, but also valuable. That made her even more unsafe. If word spread, hunters would come. And they would not ask questions. They would take her and silence anyone in their way. Daniel leaned back in his chair, whispering to himself, "What have you dragged into your life, old fool?" But then the woman stirred. A small sound escaping her lips. Her eyes opened slowly, reflecting the orange glow of the heater. She looked around in panic until her gaze settled on him. Her voice came weak, broken by pauses, but she forced out words, "Not. Send back. Please." Daniel's chest tightened. She did not know him, yet she begged him. He nodded slowly, speaking in a calm voice. "You're safe. No one will send you back." She tilted her head, trying to understand. Her lips moved, repeating softly, "Safe," as if testing the word for the first time. Daniel pulled a chair closer to her side. He offered her more water, and she drank carefully. Her hands trembling, she tried again to speak, fragments of her language mixing with broken human words. "Master? Cruel, no light, no freedom," she whispered. Daniel clenched his fists, the picture forming clearly. Now she had been a prisoner, owned by someone. Her eyes filled with tears, glowing faintly as they rolled down her cheeks. Daniel felt a strange ache inside, a protective fire he had not known in years. He had lived alone so long, pushing people away, yet this fragile stranger stirred something human in him. He wanted to shield her, even if he did not know how. The night stretched on, filled with silence and the occasional whisper. She tried to ask questions too, pointing at things in his small home. At his wrench, she repeated tool. At the heater, she whispered warm. He realized she was learning. Quick and eager, despite her weakness, her smile, faint but real, lit the room brighter than the heater itself. But Daniel knew this piece was fragile. Already he imagined shadows outside, strangers knocking, demanding their property back. He had no weapons, only tools and grit. But he would not let them take her. He kept glancing at the door, each creak of wind making his pulse rise. Still, he forced himself to stay calm. For her sake, at one point, her voice broke the quiet. She pointed to herself and said a word, "He." Barely caught Lyra. Daniel repeated it slowly. "Lyra." She nodded, eyes softening, then pointed at him. "Daniel," he said, and her lips curved into a small smile. That moment, names were exchanged, and a bond was born. She leaned closer, whispering again, "Safe." Daniel, the way she said his name sent a shiver through him. Not of fear, but of meaning. She trusted him already, or at least wanted to. And he realized that trust was heavier than any chain, a responsibility he had not asked for but could not refuse. When dawn crept closer, Daniel remained awake, keeping watch. Lyra finally slept peacefully, her body no longer tense. Outside, the wind carried the sound of distant engines. Maybe traders, maybe worse. Daniel's jaw tightened. He knew someone out there was missing their delivery, and it was only a matter of time before they traced it to him. But as the first light Of morning touch to the desert sand, he whispered to himself, "They won't take you. Not while I breathe." He looked at Lyra, wrapped in his blanket, glowing softly with her strange markings. In that quiet hour, he knew his life had changed. Forever, the wrong delivery had not been wronged, it had been destiny, and the first night had sealed it. Morning came to the outpost with pale light stretching across the barren land. Daniel had not slept, his eyes heavy, but his mind sharp with unease. Lyra sat at the small table, eating the bread he gave her slowly, carefully, as if each bite had to be treasured. Her silver hair caught the sunlight through the cracked window, and the glowing lines across her arms flickered faintly like embers. For a moment, it almost looked normal, like two strangers sharing a quiet meal. But Daniel knew this was no normal morning. A mistake like this an alien woman delivered to the wrong man would not be ignored for long. The galaxy was vast. But word traveled quickly on the trade routes, and powerful people always demanded what was theirs. He went outside to fetch water. The air crisp and dry as he filled his jug. He noticed two traders at the far end of the dusty road. They were whispering together, throwing glances at the scattered houses. When one of them pointed toward Daniel's outpost, a cold weight settled in his stomach. He hurried back inside, setting the jug down with more force than he meant to. Lyra looked up, sensing his tension. Daniel knelt beside her and spoke softly. "Someone is searching." She froze, her markings pulsing faster with her quickened breath. She whispered one word, trembling, "Hunters." Daniel's jaw tightened. He had heard rumors of such people. Bounty men who collected more than credits, they collected lives. Later that day, while Daniel repaired a broken generator for a neighbor, he overheard them speak. The neighbor's wife muttered, "They say a rare gift has gone missing," meant. For a rich buyer, another man added in a hushed tone. A woman, not just any woman, but one with the glow of stars on her skin. Daniel kept his face blank, but his chest felt like stone. The whispers had already reached the village. That night, Lyra sat close to the heater, her eyes distant. Daniel asked her quietly, "This buyer, who is he?" Her voice cracked. As she answered, "Lord Veron," she lifted her sleeve, showing scars on her wrist. Marks of iron cuffs. Her eyes shimmered with tears as she whispered, "Property." The word burned in Daniel's ears. He had known cruelty, but to treat a living woman as cargo, as a gift, filled him with rage. He leaned forward, speaking firmly, "Not here, not with me." "You are not property," she looked at him as though she wanted to believe, her lips shaping the word again. "Not property." Her voice was shaky, but hope glimmered in it, for the first time. Lyra told him more of her story, broken fragments pieced together between gestures and words. She had been taken from her homeworld, sold and traded across stations. Like an object, each owner had promised she was only a gift, but each treated her as less than human. Lord Veron was the last wealthy. Feared, cruel beyond measure, her escape had never been planned, but fate had carried her crate into Daniel's hands. Daniel listened in silence, his anger building with each word. He thought of calling the authorities again, but he already knew what would happen. The law in these parts was not for people like Lyra. It was for the ones with power and credits. If he reported her, she would be taken and returned like stolen cargo, and he would be punished for interfering. As the wind howled outside, Daniel sat with her, both of them wrapped in the flickering light of the heater. He reached for his old toolbox, setting it beside him. If hunters came, he would not fight with weapons. He had none. But he had tools, clever hands, and stubborn will. Sometimes survival was not about strength, but about refusing to surrender. The days that followed were tense. Daniel noticed more strangers around the trade station, asking questions, scanning crates. One evening, a man stopped him outside the supply store, his voice smooth but sharp. Have you seen anything unusual? Something. Misplaced, Daniel forced a smile and shook his head, but inside his heart pounded. He hurried home, warning Lyra not to leave the outpost. She obeyed, but he saw how restless she became. Pacing the floor, clutching the blanket, whispering in her own tongue. At night, she often woke with a start, gasping for air, crying silently until Daniel sat near her. Each time she clung to his presence, as if his simple promise of safety was the only shield she had left. One evening, she placed her hand on his and whispered, "Why? Keep me." Daniel looked at her, her glowing eyes searching for an answer. He thought for a long moment before speaking. "Because no one deserves chains," he said quietly. Her lips trembled, and she repeated the words as if they were sacred. No one deserves chains, but outside their fragile shelter, danger grew. The whispers of ownership were no longer whispers. They were hunts. Men with sharp eyes and sharper tools of tracking were moving closer, and Daniel knew the time was coming when his choice would no longer be secret. The universe would knock at his door, demanding what he refused to return. And when that moment came, he would have to stand, not just for himself, but for Lee Ruth, a woman fate had delivered to the wrong man, the woman he could not abandon. The outpost grew restless in the following days. Every corner of the small settlement seemed to carry whispers about the missing alien woman. Traders shared stories over cups of stale coffee. Hunters asked too many questions, and Daniel felt eyes watching him whenever he stepped outside. He kept his head low, but inside his chest the pressure built, like a storm waiting to break, inside. His small home, Lyra, remained hidden. She moved carefully, always listening for footsteps outside the door. At night, she often pressed her ear against the wall. Trembling when she heard distant engines or voices, Daniel tried to comfort her, telling her she was safe. But deep down, he feared his words were fragile shields. One evening, as the sun sank red over the desert horizon, Daniel lit the small lamp. He found Lyra sitting near the heater, humming softly in a language he did not know. The sound was gentle, almost like a lullaby, carrying sorrow and hope in equal measure. When she noticed him, she stopped, embarrassed, but he smiled. "Don't stop," he said softly. "It's beautiful." Her cheeks flushed faintly, the glow of her markings deepening. She tried to explain, mixing broken words with gestures. "Song. From home." "Mother," she whispered, her hand resting against her chest. Daniel's throat tightened, realizing how much she had lost. He leaned closer, listening as she sang again. And for a moment, the fear outside the walls faded. Slowly, their bond grew. Stronger, Daniel began teaching her simple human words, pointing at objects in the room. "Chair," he said, and she repeated, stumbling at first, but smiling when he nodded. She laughed gently when she got a word right. And her laughter, light and strange, filled the outpost with warmth Daniel had not felt in years. In return, she taught him words from her own language. He stumbled far more than she did, but she laughed. With patience, her hand would sometimes brush against his when guiding him, sending a spark through him he could not explain. At night, they spoke in fragments, piecing together meaning from two broken languages, yet somehow always understanding each other. But outside, danger pressed closer. Daniel saw new faces in the marketplace. Men and women dressed not like traders, but like hunters. They carried questions in their eyes and knives at their belts. One asked openly at the supply stand, "Hess, anyone seen a woman with glowing marks?" Daniel kept walking, but his hands curled into fists. That night, he returned home more tense than ever. Lyra noticed at once, her eyes narrowing as she stepped close. He tried to hide his worry, but she reached for his hand and whispered, "Hunters." He nodded. Grimly, "They are close." Her markings flared briefly. Like fear made visible on her skin, Daniel pulled out his old maps of the desert mines. He showed her tunnels where they might hide if the hunters came too near. Her fingers traced the lines, her eyes wide with trust as she whispered, "Safe." "With you," Daniel swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her words. He was only one man with tools, yet she looked at him as if he was stronger than any army. The days blurred together. They cooked small meals, shared quiet laughter, and sometimes sat in silence, comfort found not in words, but in presence. Daniel caught himself watching her often, the way she tilted her head when learning a word, the way her silver hair glimmered like threads of moonlight. She was no longer just the wrong delivery, she was Lyra, a person who had begun to carve her place into his life, but with each passing night. Daniel also knew time was running out. Hunters would not stop, and whispers in the village grew louder. Once he overheard a man say, "The Lord will pay double for anyone who finds her." Daniel walked away quickly, fear pressing on him, but also anger. To them, she was a prize. To him, she was a person. One stormy evening, the rain pounding on the roof, Daniel found Lyra standing at the door. She looked out at the wet darkness, her body trembling. He stepped beside her, asking softly, "Do you want to run?" She shook her head, her glowing eyes turning to his. "No, stay." "With you," she whispered, her hand brushing against his. The words struck him deeply. She was not only hiding, she was choosing to trust him. Daniel closed his hand gently around hers. The silence, heavy with meaning. They stayed like that for a long time, the storm raging outside. But inside the outpost, something unshakable formed. A bond in secret, fragile but real. As the night stretched on, Daniel sat awake. He knew soon the hunters would knock, and the secret they shared would be tested. But when he looked at Lyra curled beside the heater, glowing faintly in her sleep, he whispered, "Whatever comes, we face it together." And in that moment, the outpost grew restless. In the following days, every corner of the small settlement seemed to carry whispers about the missing alien woman. Traders shared stories over cups of stale coffee. Hunters asked too many questions. And Daniel felt eyes watching him whenever he stepped outside. He kept his head low, but inside his chest, the pressure built. Like a storm waiting to break. Inside his small home, Lyra remained hidden. She moved carefully, always listening for footsteps outside the door. At night, she often pressed her ear against the wall, trembling when she heard distant engines or voices. Daniel tried to comfort her, telling her she was safe. But deep down, he feared his words were fragile shields. One evening, as the sun sank red over the desert horizon, Daniel lit the small lamp. He found Lyra sitting near the heater, humming softly in a language he did not know. The sound was gentle, almost like a lullaby, carrying sorrow and hope in equal measure. When she noticed him, she stopped, embarrassed, but he smiled. "Don't stop," he said softly. "It's beautiful." Her cheeks flushed faintly, the glow of her markings deepening. She tried to explain, mixing broken words with gestures. "Song from home." "Mother," she whispered, her hand resting against her chest. Daniel's throat tightened, realizing how much she had lost. He leaned closer, listening as she sang again. And for a moment, the fear outside the walls faded. Slowly, their bond grew. Stronger, Daniel began teaching her simple human words, pointing at objects in the room. "Chair," he said, and she repeated, stumbling at first but smiling when he nodded. She laughed gently when she got a word right. And her laughter, light and strange, filled the outpost with warmth Daniel had not felt in years. In return, she taught him words from her own language. He stumbled far more than she did, but she laughed. With patience, her hand would sometimes brush against his when guiding him, sending a spark through him he could not explain. At night, they spoke in fragments, piecing together meaning from two broken languages, yet somehow always understanding. each other. But outside, danger pressed closer. Daniel saw new faces in the marketplace. Men and women dressed not like traders, but like hunters. They carried questions in their eyes and knives at their belts. One asked openly at the supply stand, "Has anyone seen a woman with glowing marks?" Daniel kept walking. But his hands curled into fists. That night, he returned home more tense than ever. Lyra noticed at once, her eyes narrowing as she stepped close. He tried to hide his worry, but she reached for his hand and whispered, "Hunters." He nodded. Grimly, "They are close." Her markings flared briefly. Like fear made visible on her skin, Daniel pulled out his old maps of the desert mines. He showed her tunnels where they might hide if the hunters came too near. Her fingers traced the lines, her eyes wide with trust as she whispered, "Safe." "With you," Daniel swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her words. He was only one man with tools, yet she looked at him as if he was stronger than any army. The days blurred together. They cooked small meals, shared quiet laughter, and sometimes sat in silence. Comfort found not in words, but in presence. Daniel caught himself watching her often, the way she tilted her head when learning a word. The way her silver hair glimmered like threads of moonlight. She was no longer just the wrong delivery, she was Lyra, a person who had begun to carve her place into his life, but with each passing night. Daniel also knew time was running out. Hunters would not stop, and whispers in the village grew louder. Once he overheard a man say, "The Lord will pay double for anyone who finds her." Daniel walked away quickly, fear pressing on him, but also anger. To them she was a prize, to him she was a person. One stormy evening, the rain pounding on the roof, Daniel found Lyra standing at the door. She looked out at the wet darkness, her body trembling. He stepped beside her, asking softly, "Do you want to run?" She shook her head, her glowing eyes turning to his. "No, stay." "With you?" she whispered, her hand brushing against his. The words struck him deeply. She was not only hiding, she was choosing to trust him. Daniel closed his hand gently around hers. The silence heavy with meaning. They stayed like that for a long time, the storm raging outside. But inside the outpost, something unshakable formed. A bond in secret, fragile but real. As the night stretched on, Daniel sat awake. He knew soon the hunters would knock, and the secret they shared would be tested. But when he looked at Lyra, curled beside the heater, glowing faintly in her sleep, he whispered, "Whatever comes, we face it together." And in that moment, he no longer felt alone. The message came at dawn. Daniel found it waiting at his door. A small data chip sealed in black casing. He placed it into his old terminal, and the screen flickered alive with a cold, sharp face. The man on the screen was tall, dressed in silver robes, with eyes like burning coals, Lord Veron himself. Human, the voice boomed, smooth yet venomous. "You have something that belongs to me." Daniel's chest tightened. His worst fear had arrived. The Lord knew where she was, or at least knew enough to send a warning. The message continued, "Return her, and you will be rewarded. Defy me, and you will be destroyed." The screen went dark, leaving silence heavy in the small outpost. Daniel sat frozen, fists clenched behind him. Lyra stepped forward, her eyes wide with fear. She had heard every word, her body trembling as she whispered, "He found us." Daniel turned to her, forcing calm into his voice. "He does not own you, not here." But Lyra shook her head, tears forming. "You, in danger." "Because of me?" she whispered, clutching his sleeve. Daniel placed his hands on her shoulders, steady and firm. "I was in danger the moment I opened that crate, but I would make the same choice again." Her glowing markings pulsed faintly, as if her heart answered his words. Later that day, more ships landed in the village. Hunters filled the streets, their eyes sharp, their questions sharper. Neighbors whispered nervously, no one daring to challenge Lord Varon's reach. Daniel heard one man mutter, "No one defies him, not and lives." But Daniel kept walking. His face calm, though inside his chest burned with fire. That evening, a new message came. This time, it was an offer: wealth, safety, even pardon if you deliver her back. The voice said coldly, "Your life will be spared, and you will live in comfort." Daniel stared at the words glowing on the screen. It would be so easy: give her up, walk away, survive. He looked across the room, where Lyra sat curled near the heater, her silver hair falling across her face. She was whispering to herself, her voice low, repeating the human words he had taught her. Safe, free, not property, she said again and again, as if trying to carve them into her soul. Daniel's throat tightened, the choice pressing heavier than ever. He could save himself, or he could save her, but not both. That night, sleep did not come. Daniel sat by the window, watching shadows move outside. The hunters were searching every home. It was only a matter of time before they knocked behind him. Lyra rose silently and came to sit beside him. She looked at him with tired eyes and whispered, "You can give me back." "Safe for you." Daniel turned sharply, his voice fierce. "No, never. I will not trade your life for mine." She blinked, tears shining in her glowing eyes. "You don't understand," he said softer. "I lost too much already. I will not lose you too." His words stunned even himself. When had she become more than a stranger? More than a mistake? More than fate? For a long moment, silence hung heavy. Then she whispered, "Daniel, my choice." Freedom, her trembling hand reached for his, her fingers weaving into his. "I want freedom." "With you," she said, her voice breaking but steady. Daniel squeezed her hand, and in that moment, his choice was sealed. When dawn arrived, the hunters came knocking. Their fists pounded against the door. Demanding entry, Daniel opened it slowly. His face calm, his body steady. One of the hunters sneered, "We know she is here, human. Step aside." Daniel stood tall, his voice firm. "No one here belongs to you." The hunters pushed forward, but Daniel had prepared. He triggered the trap he had built during the night. A cloud of smoke burst into the room, wires snapping, sparks flying. The hunters coughed, blinded. As Daniel pulled Lyra through the back door, together they ran into the desert. The rising sun casting fire across the sands. Behind them, shouts rose, engines roared. The chase had begun. But Daniel did not falter, his grip on Lyra's hand unbreakable. She stumbled, but he pulled her forward, whispering, "Don't stop. Freedom is ahead." Her glowing markings lit the path faintly, as if her very body refused to return to chains. They reached the old mines, slipping into the tunnels as the hunters thundered past above. Breathless, they collapsed inside the darkness. Lyra leaned against him, her chest heaving, her eyes shining with tears. "You choose me," she whispered, her voice fragile yet filled with wonder. Daniel held her close, his words rough but steady, always, and in the silence of the mine, with danger still hunting them. The bond of choice became unbreakable. The universe had demanded he return her. The powerful had offered him gold, safety, and life. But Daniel had chosen something greater. He had chosen freedom, not just for her, but for himself too, for in protecting Lyra, he had found the meaning his life had long forgotten. The mines were cold and dark, but to Daniel and Lyra they felt like shelter. The air smelled of old stone and dust, but it was safe, quiet, and hidden. Days passed without sunlight, but they had food, water, and each other. And for the first time, their lives were no longer ruled by fear. Lyra spent her days drawing symbols in the dirt, teaching Daniel the words of her people. She told him stories with broken speech and gentle hands, tales of stars, singing forests, and skies that changed color with feeling. Daniel, in return, taught her how to build small machines from scraps. They fixed a broken heater together, then made light from old power cells. In the silence of the mine, they built more than tools. They built a home outside the hunters searched for them. But the trail had gone cold. Lord Veron's fury echoed through the village. Promises of punishment for those who helped the human, but no one spoke. No one dared face a man who had stood up to a monster and lived. And slowly, the hunters left, ships rising like black arrows into the sky. The danger faded like smoke. But the bond forged in fire remained weeks later. Daniel led Lyra out of the mine for the first time. The morning sun spilled across the land. Turning the sands golden, Lyra stood at the edge of the rock ledge. Eyes wide, breath caught in her throat, she stretched her arms toward the sky and whispered, "Free," and Daniel stood beside her, silent, knowing no word could match the power of that moment. They returned to the outpost, cautious but stronger. Daniel's home had been searched, his tools scattered, his supplies taken, but the walls still stood, and so did his will. With Lyra's help, he rebuilt what had been broken, and together they made it better than before. She painted the walls with glowing ink from her people, symbols of safety, of peace, of belonging. Daniel crafted new shelves, fixed the broken water pump, and even built a garden box near the window. They cooked together, ate together, and laughed. More than either thought possible, in a place where silence once ruled. Now lived warmth. One quiet evening, Lyra stood beside him, her fingers brushing over his hand. She looked into his eyes, her voice soft. "You changed my life," she whispered. Daniel smiled gently, replying, "You changed mine too." And the truth of it sank into both their hearts like roots finding soil. But change had not only come to them. Across nearby settlements, word spread. Of the human who defied a powerful lord. Of the alien woman who escaped chains and found freedom not by running, but by being seen. Some called it foolish, others called it brave. But to those who had been forgotten, who lived in fear, it was hope. One day, a knock came at Daniel's door. He opened it slowly, prepared for anything, but instead of hunters, he found a young alien girl and her mother. They spoke nervously, asking if Lyra truly lived free here. Lyra stepped forward, smiled, and opened the door wider. Soon others came quiet. Tired souls from different worlds, not many, just a few, but enough to know that something had changed. Daniel and Lyra gave what they could, shelter, food, warmth, and stories. They built more beds, fixed old cabins nearby, and taught others the meaning of choice. The outpost, once lonely, became a place of beginnings. One evening, Lyra and Daniel sat under the stars. She rested her head against his shoulder. Her markings glowed softly, responding to the heartbeat she trusted most. Daniel looked at her and asked, "If you had never been sent here?" "If it had been someone else," Lyra smiled, her voice gentle. "Then I would still be in chains." The wind carried silence between them, heavy with truth. "I was never meant for you," she added. "But you chose me." Daniel took her hand, his voice low. "And I would choose you again, in the vast, cold galaxy." Mistakes were common. But sometimes, the greatest miracles came disguised as errors. The crate had been marked for another man, a lord with power, gold, and darkness in his heart. But it had arrived at the hands of a quiet repairman, a man who didn't see a gift or property or profit. He saw a person, and that changed everything. In the end, it was not force that saved Lyra, not weapons, not money, not revenge. It was one human's quiet refusal to give her back. One man who looked at her and said, "You deserve to be free," and meant it now. Their days were filled with light, not fear, with laughter, not silence. With love not the love built in stories or legends, but the kind grown slowly, carefully. Like flowers in dry land, together, they proved that sometimes the universe makes mistakes, but people don't have to.